Joining me is Liz Storer, Head of Advance Australia, a Conservative political lobby group, and Gideon Rozner, Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs. Liz, look, I'm not someone that's who easily accepts restrictions, but has this gone over the top?
Yeah, look, it's the million-dollar question. How far is too far when it comes to state control? We can all recognise that states have significant powers in an emergency, and thank God for that. There'd be pandemonium otherwise. But when we see them taking measures like the ones you've just detailed, heck, I'm in WA. We've got drones flying around here, barking at people if and when they're seen to be doing the wrong thing. So as per the examples that you've already used, you've got to start wondering whether the states have drunk the Kool-Aid when things reach this level. And I think there's valid questions being asked about the lawfulness of restricting the purposes for which people can go outside. Certainly the social distancing needs to happen, and we're seeing that be effective. But in terms of making it unlawful to leave your house for certain reasons, there's a lot of people with already growing unrest about this. And as you've already alluded to, if we're in for the long haul of this, which our government does keep referring to, the 6 months is quite a familiar term by now, then making such hardcore calls so early on in the piece may not be the smartest move. As Aussies, it's going to be some growing unrest there. But
no,
one last thing.
I think there's more than that. I think there's something more than that, Liz. Now, listen, I got to put in context. You know, I've got my little hand sanitizer here, and I, don't crowd people, and I space myself out in a queue, and I don't go to crowds, and I obey all the laws. All the laws.
You're a good boy, Rolls. You're a good boy.
I am a very good. We Dutch are like that. But listen, Gideon, the problem is, Gideon Rozner, while I support most of the restrictions, the risk is if you get over-the-top ones, the stupid ones that people can't see a rationale for, they'll get so jack of it, they'll ignore those good rules as well.
Yeah, and like you, Andrew, I initially, begrudgingly, with the keenest of reluctance, like the good libertarian I am, supported some of these restrictions as a necessary evil. But I don't support these latest restrictions. I think it's gone way over the top, and it's particularly bad here in the, sadly, what I used to joke about calling the People's Republic of Victoria, but it has become a police state and an authoritarian state. Daniel Andrews is out of control. He has become a threat to democracy, because don't forget, Andrew, that these restrictions have not been made by Parliament. They have been made by a Principal Act passed by John Brumby as Premier 12 years ago. Even though, technically, strictly speaking, under that Act, Daniel Andrews has the legal right to be passing these restrictions without parliamentary oversight, he shouldn't do that as a matter of propriety. He should be recalling Parliament to actually give the people a say over some of these things. And you are right. People will say, what is the difference between going fishing by myself and going jogging by myself? What is the difference between going to visit my parent and going to visit my girlfriend? The rules are now so convoluted and so complicated, and I might add, badly communicated to people. You have to actually look really hard to find the administrative order containing these rules to actually learn the terms of your own house arrest. And the worst part about it is, I think in a lot of ways, maybe not Daniel Andrews, but law enforcement agencies and everything else, I'm detecting that some of them are relishing actually pushing people around like this. I think that there are a lot of power-hungry bureaucrats.
The philosopher C.S. Lewis said something, 100 years ago, the guy that wrote the Narnia books. He said, of all the bullies, the one that you've got to be wary of most is the one who bullies you for your own good, because their conscience will tell them to keep going.
Absolutely.
Every time. But Liz,
absolutely.
I just wonder, see, this really annoys me, because on the one hand we have this kind of stuff, but on the other, the quarantining of people. We won't be able to relax these stay-home laws until we do a proper job of protecting the elderly and quarantining those people with the virus or waiting out their self-isolation. But here, again, Victoria Police, good, they've issued more than 36 fines for people breaking quarantine rules. Queensland Police has issued 11 just last night. But the thing is, it's a fine. Why not say, listen, if you even look like breaking these things, you're into compulsory quarantine, not a fine. We're going to lock you up because the risk to everyone else is too great.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if we've got rule breakers on our hands, especially, we know 2/3, I think even more last I checked, of the cases here in Australia have come from overseas. So these people, absolutely, they're breaking the rules of any kind, is actually putting others at very real risk. And I can't disagree with you. Absolutely, put these people away. Do as we've done with others who have returned, putting them up in hotels, etc., and so on. Just make them do the social isolating time as per everyone else.
Gideon, we had the Prime Minister today criticising China's wet market practices. Now, that's where the coronavirus is thought to have come from. One in China, where they sell wild animals and slaughter them in front of you, etc., etc., and there's been a transmission believed to be from animals to humans. Suspicion about bats. Now, the good news on that front, Shenzhen, a big city across from Hong Kong, has become the first city in China to ban people from eating cats and dogs as of May the 1st. And China's also passed a law to ban eating or farming of wild animals. I guess we should give China some credit for moving at last belatedly.
Look, I'm not in the mood to be giving China particularly much credit, particularly after they've handled this outbreak so far. Look, I'll be honest with you, Andrew. I'm the kind of guy that goes overseas and loves eating weird stuff. And if I was travelling through China or wherever else, I'd probably be the first to hoe into a bowl of bat soup up until now. Now I begrudgingly accept that eating bats in particular is a very, very dangerous thing to be doing, because bats are mammals like us. It is easier to, diseases can skip from birds and so on, but they're more likely to skip from other mammals like bats. And this isn't the first time that a global pandemic has resulted from the consumption of bats. I believe that the SARS epidemic in 2002 was bat-related. So, look, as I said, I am not particularly concerned about eating bats versus, I don't see it as being different from eating cattle or chicken or anything else. But in this instance, for the health and safety of the world, we do have to put pressure on China to outlaw certain elements, at least, of these wet markets.
I think bat soup is a small price. Giving that up is a
small price to pay.
Correct. The world from something like this. Liz, here's one thing I don't understand. What is exactly the point in which we should be able to relax these stay-home rules? Is it when there is absolutely no more coronavirus transmitted? Is it when people stop dying? Is it when people stop dying also of the flu? I mean, we don't shut down the country and 1,000, 2,000 can die from that. When exactly do we ease these restrictions?
This is what we're all wondering, Bolt, and I don't think anyone has come up with a comprehensive answer, whether it's MPs, health professionals. No one really seems to be flagging a comprehensive end date to the house arrest that we all find ourselves going through. The implications to the economy, the implications to people's mental health has been talked about at great length. But in terms of how and when it's safe to lift these bans, allow people back outside, back at work, there really isn't an end in sight that we're hearing about. Like I said before, we keep hearing about this 6 months, but when? When is it actually
but 6 months is just
over?
a date. That's just a date plucked out of the air. But the point,
exactly.
The reason, Gideon, this is important to resolve is that we hear one of the Deputy Chief Medical Officers saying he doesn't think the virus will go away until we have a vaccine, and that might not be 1.5, 2 years from now. Who knows?
That could be 2 years, correct.
What is the end game here?
Well, that's right. Look, I think what is encouraging about the Prime Minister's press conference today is that for the first time, he was talking about the pathway out of these restrictions, and he was actually saying that the six-month time frame is not guaranteed. Now, that to me is a no-brainer. Australians culturally cannot live under house arrest as prisoners in our own homes for 6 months. In fact, the time for the Prime Minister and the state premiers and the territory chief ministers to start dismantling this lockdown is now. At the very least, what they need to do is give us a plan of how they intend to ease these restrictions and tell us what it is. I frankly think that it is time we need to keep quarantining people who've arrived back from overseas, particularly from cruise ships, which account for a lot of our cases. We need to keep up social distancing measures. We need to isolate the vulnerable and the elderly. But in terms of other businesses in our economy, we should start looking at the limited reopening of things like churches, particularly with Easter around the corner, of things like bars, of things like restaurants. We should get community sport going again. I mean, there is a great societal price to be paid for these restrictions. And the IPA has worked out that for every day of this lockdown, over 70,000 Australians have lost their jobs. They've lost their dignity, their employment, their meaning, their interactions with other people, obviously their economic well-being. People might say we can't afford to ease these restrictions. I say we cannot afford not to ease these restrictions as soon as possible, and their time is now.
And the point is, it's not all or nothing. You can loosen a few of them,
exactly,
put them back on if it doesn't work. Just see how it goes. We can do that. We're not that stupid. Liz Thorer and Gideon Rozner, thank you both so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks.